Hi everyone. Thank you so much for making time this morning. I will quickly go over the agenda and then I'll pass it on to Ms. Budra, our principal, to take it further. First item on the agenda is PTO news and events, so I'm not going to take too much time. Very quickly, we are still looking for open board positions to fill. So anybody interested, please let us know, contact one of the PTO board members or write to amspto@yahoo.com. We have 3 open positions, including my own, starting next school year. So please, I encourage all of you to contact one of us. We'll give you the details, and we need some fresh, enthusiastic parents to join us on the board. With that, the next item is AO update on sports. Stephanie?
So our spring sports season is underway. Team started games last week in meets. We also have open board positions, so if anyone's interested, please come see me after the meeting. There will also be details around it in the Vaping Express this week. We also have our once-a-year public meeting next week on Wednesday, so if you're interested in joining us, again, it is details are in the Vaping Express, but it's next Wednesday, 9:15 in the cafeteria ends. And again, we're still collecting box tops, so if anyone has them, please send them in. They're collected in the main office and they help defray some of our costs.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. All right, next item is Vans updates with our principal, Mrs. Budra.
Good morning, everyone. I am going to be very brief because I know we have a panel of experts here to share their information. The biggest update that I'm going to share is that we have our WAMS Expo coming up, which is an opportunity for families to come with their students and to see all different types of students' expressions artistically. The entire school gets transformed basically into an art gallery, but we showcase music, we showcase art, we showcase writing, also things that are being prepared in our elective programs. That's coming up in May. So there is information in the Friday folder about that, and it begins at 5 here, I believe it's the 13th. There goes the sound system. So you can hear me, it's my mommy voice. And so I hope that everybody can join us for that activity. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bush, who's going to introduce some of our panels. I thank them all, members, for coming today. I think it's going to be very educational. It's going to give us an opportunity to again join together on this fight of keeping our children healthy. And so, Dr. Bush. They're not working. I have it.
I guess I have to use my mommy voice too.
Go ahead. You can. I'll fix it.
There it goes. Thank you, Mr. Nick.
You're welcome.
Being here helps everything.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming out this morning. We love to do presentations, but we really appreciate it when parents come to take advantage of the knowledgeable people that we have available for us. I just want to definitely thank Communities in Crisis and the Burns Township Municipal Alliance for organizing this morning and for arranging for all the presenters. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Melissa Tesfaye as our first speaker and our primary speaker this morning. She and her husband Daniel have 2 children at Newark Academy, her daughter Gabrielle and son Dominic. Melissa holds a PhD in neuropharmacology from the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston and a bachelor's in science and biomedical sciences from Texas A&M University. After graduation, Melissa joined the pharmaceutical industry, where she held positions of increasing responsibility in medical affairs, marketing, and training. Dr. Tesfaye has a passion for volunteer work, as you'll see today, and directed at healthcare and education, where she can use her training as a scientist and a communicator. She's the founder and CEO of the Honeybee Foundation, as you can see, which she has dedicated to providing education and resources to help prevent and tackle the scourge of substance abuse disorders. Dr. Tesfaye has significant experience in institutional governance. She serves on the board of Newark Academy, chairs the State Public Affairs Committee, representing all of the junior leagues of New Jersey, where she's involved in influencing and shaping public policy for health and education of women and children. She has served on the Board of Trustees of the Overlook Foundation, a leading neuroscience institution, for the previous 9 years. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Tesfaye to William Annin this morning.
I don't even know. Well, how is it gonna work? So who is that person that she just introduced? That's so funny. I never heard it out loud. I'm like, wow, I like her. No. So I don't even know if I need this, and I'm like a walker and a talker, so I'm not sure. Can you hear me? Yeah, totally okay. Oh, sorry, it's being video recorded, so I might be hindered here. So maybe I'll just take it off. So yes, essentially that's my bio. And I created this foundation because just a little background to see the evolution is that with the Junior League, someone walked in one day and said, what's up with this opioid epidemic, right? Some news articles had started to come out and they're like, you don't have to shoot up heroin anymore, right? You can take a pill. I'm like, what? And they're like, Melissa, you're a neuroscientist, figure this out. And so I just started researching it and attending lots of conferences, reading lots of books to really understand what was going on. It's all about addiction, really. But what happened was I would talk to my friends about it, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Like, zero clue, nothing. And I was like, oh my gosh, parents don't understand. And parents are the most important piece in all of this, because I truly believe that if parents understood what I'm about to go through, there's no way we would have gotten to this epidemic of opioids, because parents are really the stopgap. And it's all about children, and it's all about brain development. And I'm so pleased for this program because you guys are the absolute perfect audience. Because when you had babies, right, you guys, how many read that What to Expect When You're Expecting book? Right? It was all about what you need to do as a mother, what you do for the terrible twos, and it was a little manual, right, to help you figure out what you're supposed to do. But no one tells you what you're supposed to do when puberty sets in and adolescence sets in, right, and your brains and the kids' brains start to change. That's a whole other need for a book, which I'll start to write, and that's my goal. But I think that this point in time, there is another parenting book that's needed, because there's a lot of changes in the brain that are going on that make kids vulnerable to a whole host of things, including substance use. So that's what we're going to go through today. And please, if you have any questions, I'm happy. I try to make this a little, as casual and welcoming and inviting as possible. So if you have any questions or comments, please don't be afraid to raise your hand. So essentially, it's all about the brain, right? So as parents, we do all of these things to protect our kids' brains, right? We make sure they wear a helmet when they ride a bike, when they go on the scooter, snow skiing. My kids surf, and I'm like, when are they going to invent helmets for surfing? When is that going to become cool, right? Because of all the rocks, I'm like, I'm not sure I like this. So we are worried about technology, right? I'm sure you guys have been to all of those presentations about technology in the brain, and we're worried about that, right? But then when kids get to high school, and then some parents are like, he's just experimenting, right? We've done all of these things. We've given them tutors to do everything we can to protect their brains, but for some reason, the substance use part, parents are just like, not all parents, but are just kind of a little bit more dismissive. But again, I think that if they understood a little bit more of what's happening, they would change their tune. So addiction, or I might use the term substance use disorder, is really a pediatric issue, right? 94% of all addictions start during adolescence, and that's before the age of 25. And that's why I don't like this vaping, because younger and younger kids are using it, and now marijuana is now being vaped, and we'll get into all of that, but it affects kids' brains during development. And I'm going to walk you through why their brain is so vulnerable.
So this little piece of information, in fact, someday I'm going to put the graphic here because when I actually saw the data, I was so struck by the age of onset of use. So the time of first use that a kid uses a substance, if they start at 11, it's something like 80% of kids are going to get addicted to something, right? If you start using something at age 11, and then slowly as you get older, that risk of developing an addiction gets lower and lower until like about the age of 25. So if we are able to at least get our kids to 21, right? That's the legal age for all of the substances. If we can at least get our kids to never use anything, I know it's a lofty goal, but I'm an ideal person. But if we can get them to wait till they're 21, the risk of them developing an addiction is like 1 in 98. So it's a really, really important thing for us as a goal to try to achieve. And it's, again, because the brain is under construction. And the brain is developing until the age of 25. So when our kids reach middle school, and then all of a sudden their hormones go crazy, and they go through puberty, and then they get to high school and they start to look like an adult, their body may look like an adult, but their brain is not an adult by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm not going to be like crazy neuroscience here, although that's my love. But this is just a slide to show you. So from left to right, this is the brain of a 5-year-old, then a preteen, then a teen, and then a 20-year-old. And then the bottom of the slide is the back of your brain, and then the top of the slide is the front of your brain. And so the brain develops from back to forward. The purple and the blue means it's the most mature. So the brain is developing from the back to the front. And does anyone know what this part of your brain is called? Your prefrontal cortex. Does anyone know what that does? It controls executive function, impulse control, right? So the ability to decision making, judgment, being able to act on knowing what is right and wrong, right? I promise you all of your kids know what's right and what's wrong. But to be able to use that information and process it and to do the right thing, that part, it doesn't work. That's what the prefrontal cortex does. Right? And so this is the adolescent brain. So essentially, they have a poor functioning prefrontal cortex that tells them, even though your friend offered that to you, you shouldn't take it, right? Don't take it, right? They know they shouldn't. But the ability to say no, there's so many, right, social influences, all of these things make it really difficult for kids to say no. The adolescent brain has sort of a double jeopardy, because how many of you heard of the pleasure center or the dopamine reward system? So that's the part of your brain that gives you pleasure when you do something, right? When we're proud of our children because they studied really hard for a test and they made a good grade and they're happy and you're happy for them, right? There's dopamine released. And in adolescence, this part of the brain is rapidly developing. It is being wired vigorously, and an adolescent brain is constantly seeking reward. So as parents, one thing that we can do is to try to find moments to reward them, right? So it's really tough, especially with the prefrontal cortex not working very well and their judgment being poor, but it's really important to try to find ways that you can tell them, great job, good for doing that. And try to bite your tongue sometimes when they don't do something right, and say to yourself, does it really matter that I say this right now, right? Maybe I shouldn't always be nagging them or whatever, right? So kind of balance that, but make sure you're giving them lots of reward. Question? Oh wait, yeah. So are you a scientist? I am so sorry, I cannot actually hear you very well. So yeah, this is a PET scan. So it's, No. I mean, you could, but I would not.
No, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's no.
No, I was, I mean, before you send them off to somebody in college, I mean, you just like, sure, I want to know how mature it is, I know I will prepare the child, no.
No, it would be nice, but no. But you can usually tell from their behavior, right? That they're not quite ready. And I have to say, I find college, because I also have stepdaughters, I find college to be like this crazy time where it really shows that their brain isn't developed. Like, they really do something. I mean, maybe it's because we're not there to like kind of be their prefrontal cortex and be like, no, 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 and they just, sometimes they really go crazy. So these are the two systems that I'm going to kind of get into a little bit. So one is that prefrontal cortex, and the other is this limbic system, which is also that dopamine reward system. Okay, and we already went through this, that the normal brain is able to, I'm so sorry. Okay, so now what we have is a teenage brain that is not able to control their impulses, right? And they're not able to really process information to make themselves not do something, right? With the prefrontal cortex. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the limbic system, because this is what will really make you understand that teenage brain and why substances or other things that your kids might do, like some kids are like really big risk takers, they really crave this high risk, high reward sort of behavior. The limbic system is the part of the brain that, and again, this is rapidly developing and being wired vigorously during adolescence. It's really the survival of the species, the primitive part of the brain. So the reason it's there is so that as humans, right, evolving and surviving, when we eat, or we drink water, or we get married, or we have children, and we bond to our children, all of this is reinforcing to the brain to say, this feels good, you get dopamine release, this feels good, I want you to keep doing this, right? And so this is how the brain works for survival of the species, right? To make sure you're doing all of those things so that we as a species continue. So that's what it's really there for. And like I said, the adolescent brain is, I put this race car on here because it is, that part of the brain is going 95 miles an hour. Because if you think back of like the evolution of humans, right? Once you go through puberty, right? We used to not live so long. And so once you go through puberty and you're able to have sex and have children, that's the time that this brain is developing, because it's, again, about survival of the species, right? And so what happens with substances is that although all of these things feel really good, if a child, either they're experimenting, or more often, if you have a genetic predisposition, if you've had some things in your childhood that have bothered you. How many of you have heard of adverse childhood? The ACEs study, like adverse childhood experiences. So these are traumas. It could be divorce. It could be that someone in your home has been physically abused. You've witnessed it. You've been abused. There are lots of different things. You've been bullied that constitute what trauma is. And the more of these traumas that you have in your life, that actually changes your brain, that makes it even harder to appreciate the good things. And then when you take a drug, that dopamine release makes you feel really good. It helps you forget about the negative stuff, and then it also causes this dopamine release to make you feel good. So what happens is that if someone starts taking a drug, and it doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter if it's alcohol, it doesn't matter if it's marijuana, it doesn't matter if it's heroin, whatever. All of these substances affect this part of the brain. So whatever drug it is, it doesn't matter. And so over time, there are changes to the brain. And I don't think I have any of the scans in here, maybe a little bit later I do. But I do actually later on. But over time, if someone starts taking a drug, and again, 94% of people, this happens during childhood, right? The brain has actual physical, chemical changes. right? So that, and then once that happens, and genetic changes, and once that happens, this drug taking now becomes a chronic disease of substance use disorder or addiction. So once those changes happen, for the rest of the life of that person, they will always have to pay attention to this disease to be able to stay away from substances. So this is, as a parent, what is so important for you to understand is that if you have a kid that starts experimenting with things, that you act on it quickly. And there are some great resources. You are so lucky that you have Community in Crisis that helps. You can always contact them and they can put you in touch with the right people. And so do something early on before further damage happens to the brain, which gets even harder and harder to treat. But what happens with the brain is instead, once a kid starts taking substances, instead of the brain thinking, oh yeah, I need to eat to survive, I need to drink water to survive, the brain changes and now has been taught it's the drug that the brain needs to survive. And that's why it's so difficult once those changes happen, is because no matter what you say, right, their brain is still saying, I need the drug, I need the drug. Like they know they don't want to be taking it, but their brain has completely been, have you heard the word, hijacked by the drugs. So this is what happens, and essentially this is what makes the adolescent brain so complicated, because they don't have the brakes of the car, that prefrontal cortex, to tell them not to do something, whereas the other part of the brain is craving that incredible pleasure, right? And so this is why it's so important for you guys to understand now, like before your kids start to get into, I mean, unfortunately with the vaping, kids are starting younger and younger, but luckily, you understanding this will be so important to be able to help your kids stay off substances, and I'll get to some of that. So I did include some of these brain things. This is just to show you what happens with addiction and how it really is a chronic illness. And another huge goal of mine in doing what I do is to try to destigmatize this, right? There are people, all of us know someone who has had a friend, or maybe it even affected your own family, who has died of an addiction. Maybe they died of cancer from smoking, maybe they died from alcoholism, maybe it was an opioid overdose. But we all know someone, but we hardly talk about it because of the stigma, right? And the more that we understand this from a scientific level, the more that we will talk about substance use disorder in the same vein that we talk about treating heart disease or type 2 diabetes. So that's another big part of my goal, is I think that a lot of stigma is based on our own experiences. Like maybe we had a mother who drank too much and she wasn't nice to us. And we're like, oh my God, she chose to drink instead of take me to, you know, this party I wanted to go to. She chose to do this, and we have this anger and this resentment, and we don't really understand the disease. And so that creates this stigma and fear of what it really is. So I'm hoping that through education, we'll break down that stigma. But, so these little brains, so the one on the top is a normal brain. So all of those, so unlike the other picture I showed about the purple being the more mature, in this one, this is measuring brain activity. Does anyone know what the fuel of the brain is? Glucose. Right? So that's what this is measuring, is glucose activity in the brain. So on the top, there are normal brains, and the yellow and the red is lots of glucose activity, lots of metabolism going on. In the middle, this is someone who had developed an addiction and then has stopped for 10 days, has not taken the drug for 10 days. So you can see the huge difference between the normal brain and someone who's been addicted, right? That there is very low glucose metabolism, very low activity. And then the bottom slide is 100 days now. So that's over 3 months that someone has stopped taking a substance. And you can see it's still not even close to returning to normal, right? And more recently, because all of this neuroscience is pretty new and it's evolving. I saw just the other day a study of 14 months out, and the brain, although it still gets to look a little bit more like normal, it's still not normal. And so that's after 14 months. And that's another little thing for you to remember, like hopefully your child or your friend's child, whatever, will never develop a substance use disorder. But this idea of going to rehab, like for 2 weeks or a month, is essentially nothing and a waste of money, right? People who develop an addiction need treatment for, at minimal, they're saying now, a year. So just to keep that in mind for the future. So now I'm going to switch gears just a little because to talk about some of the substances themselves, just to understand a little bit more about it, because now there's tons of stuff about vaping in the news. You walk around and you find these all over the place, and you're like, oh my gosh, what is this stuff? And when I see it on the ground, like you kind of have to be careful because this is highly concentrated nicotine, and it can be absorbed through your skin, and it can cause really bad symptoms. Increased heart rate. There, early on, before staff in the schools knew really what it was, they were cleaning this up, and there were a couple of reports of people having to go to the hospital. Of the cleaning crew had to be hospitalized because they were just cleaning it up, and it got onto their skin, and they didn't feel well, and they had to be rushed to the emergency room, and it was because of nicotine. And that can actually, in a small child, can kill them if they're exposed to this nicotine. And there have been lots of emergency room incidences just because of the nicotine, right? And this is from the Surgeon General. Most e-cigarettes contain nicotine, which causes addiction, may harm brain development, and could lead to continued tobacco product use among youth, and also other substances. It doesn't have to be just tobacco. So this is kind of like the landscape of what's going on. I don't know if you can see all this stuff really well, but from the top to the bottom, there's cigarette smoking, cigar, smokeless tobacco, hookah, pipe, Yali, e-cigarette. And this is from 2011 to 2017. That black line at the top is in 2011, the percent of high school students who were smoking traditional cigarettes, right? And then you see that black line goes down to 7.7% to present day, essentially. And then that hot pink or red line are e-cigarettes. So in 2011, they weren't really around. It went up in 2015, and people were like, holy cow. And that's when I started doing all these talks. Like I went from doing talks on the opioid epidemic to, oh my God, you need to be talking about vaping. Because that's what happened in 2015. And then because of all my talks, no, I'm kidding. It went down a little, right? Probably because there was this heightened awareness. But then it's between 2017 and 2018 in students, 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade, there's a monitoring and future study. In that study, there was a 78% increase last year in the use of e-cigarettes. And so now it has been declared by the Surgeon General as an epidemic. Just like the opioid epidemic, now this is an epidemic. So I'm talking about vaping still. And I don't like going through tons of boring numbers, but it's just really striking to see. So this is the 2018, this Monitoring the Future study. They do a survey every year of, oh my God, I can't remember how many kids, but of 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders to see all of their substance use problems and what's going on, and what are kids doing. And this is from 2018. So 18% of 8th graders have vaped in the past year, 32% of 10th graders, and then of 12th graders, it's 37% in the past year. And then on the right-hand side is a graph of what they say they're vaping, because what they say doesn't necessarily mean what is actually in the product. So, and that's looking at 8th, 10th, and 12th graders again. So they say they're vaping nicotine. They say they're vaping marijuana, like they meant to do it. And then the just flavoring. So that's a common misperception, is that, oh mom, it's just flavoring, right? So there are some vape e-liquids that say no nicotine, but there are labs that are actively analyzing all of this stuff that's on the market. It's not regulated, but there are independent labs that do this, and some of it is government-funded research. But most products, even when they're labeled that they don't have nicotine, do have nicotine, right? And that's the thing that causes addiction. So, and nicotine is as addictive as heroin, right? It affects that pathway in the brain, like, incredibly. And the younger that kids start using these products, they're messing with their brains younger, and the development of the brain is going to be off skew. It's going to be skewed, and it's going to be really difficult for them later in life. And these brain changes now that we study them have been linked to the use of other substances. And I'll show you some of that data in a second. And then this is just past month use and how it increased from 2017 to 18 of marijuana, nicotine, and this is 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. So you can see from 2017 to 2018 that huge increase. And then I know a lot of you guys come up to the table. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on everything. But this is, although a lot, I don't know, this was kind of like the earlier kind of pen that sort of came out, but this just shows like the components of it. And so they all have a mouthpiece, right, that they, and then there's an atomizer that holds the liquid. They have a charging port, right, it's a USB charging port. So one thing I look out for is, I mean, there's still Nintendo and things, but most people have iPhones, right? And this is, I know that we love to hate Apple, right? We love them and hate them, but, and we got really mad when they changed the charging thing. You're like, oh my God, I have to buy a different cable now because it's that different, like whatever. But as a mother, knowing this, these devices, when they have to be charged, if they're using the plug, it's not necessarily, well, Juul is a little different, but sometimes it's that other one that kind of, I don't know what you say it looks like, but like the Nintendo or Amazon one that has a little different one. What?
Micro USB.
Well, there is a micro USB, but anyway, it looks a little different. So if you see not the iPhone charger hanging out and you see the other kind of charger, you know, you might raise some suspicions. And then these are just other ones. So there's like an old school one, and then the pen, and then this is the mod. I know you guys saw some of this here. Juul is by far the most popular, right? It's cool looking, it's sleek, it fits in your hand, right? Like this. I mean, like you can't even see it. You're walking around, and that's what people do. Like I see it all the time. And then they have these things called skins, so they can personalize and decorate them. So they're really, like, this is what kids love, right? And this is all helping their brain develop that pathway in the wrong way. These are other, and then this is, this is how Juul on the bottom left charges in the computer. These are all the e-liquids that you see there. And this is now marijuana. So kids, as you saw, are no longer just vaping nicotine, they're vaping marijuana. On the left, this is called packs, and you can actually put like the whole leaf marijuana in there and vape that. In the middle, this is a thing called dabbing. Have you guys heard of wax? And they can put that in there and vape it through that device with a little glass. And on the right-hand side is an asthma inhaler, but it's full of THC. And then on the bottom right, these things Kush and Berry. So this Kush has cartridges that look just like the Juul cartridges, and there are knockoff people with THC, so they'll fit into the Juul cartridge. You can go onto YouTube and do a life hack of how to take your pod and take it apart to put marijuana oil in there, THC oil instead of nicotine. So love YouTube. So the thing with nicotine is that people will say it's just water vapor, and it's not just water vapor. It's really an aerosol. So it's really, all it does is all of the particles that are in the juice are suspended, right? And none of this is sterilized, by the way. right? This is all just in someone's, like in a lab somewhere that's not clean, and they're putting all these chemicals in here. And I'm just gonna kind of like fast forward here to the lung, right? So how many of you guys remember your biology class of your respiratory system? Right? A little bit, right? You breathe through your nose, right? And it goes down your trachea, and then it goes into your bronchioles, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller until you're at these things called alveoli, right? They're tiny, tiny. Those tiny alveoli is where tiny little blood vessels pass through. And that's how you exchange, that's how your body gets oxygen, is through those tiny, tiny little alveoli, because the oxygen can actually cross the membrane into the blood supply, right? But these vaping devices, unfortunately, have all of these particles. And here, this is just like some of a list of some of the things that have been found to be in all of these e-liquid. Not, I mean, you know, there are some in others and some in, but these compounds have been found. And these are tiny little particles that when you inhale them and they get stuck in your lungs, they're not coming out, right? So every day, right, the way our respiratory system, the reason we have snot and mucus and these hairs in our nose that as we get older get really annoying, but the reason they're there is they act as a filter, right, to all these particles that we're breathing in the air. And you cough it up, you blow your nose, whatever, and it kind of acts as a filter. There was a recent study done that shows, so you're inhaling particles throughout the day, right? A normal amount of particles. When someone vapes, but then if they take I think it's called a riff, I don't know, I'm not like that street term person, but when they inhale on their vape, in 2 seconds, they have impacted their respiratory system of what took us a third of the day to inhale all those particles. So in 2 seconds, they're inhaling the same amount of particles as what we did in, 8 hours of a day. So if they're doing that more and more, essentially you're overwhelming the respiratory system just with these particles. And then that's just knowing that these are particles getting stuck in their lungs and alveoli. And then these are some of the particles, right? These are cancer-causing agents. These are lead, mercury. These are things that are really, really not good for you. So it's not just the fact that these are particles. And then, as I mentioned before, the most important thing is the fact that it's nicotine and it's addictive. And you're setting the brain up for further addictions. The other thing about vaping is just because you hear on the radio, oh, I switched, right? Or it's safe, right? No, it's not safe. For someone who smokes cigarettes, who's already addicted to cigarettes as an adult, and they are smoking traditional cigarettes, if they switch, it might be safer to vape. Again, I'm not 100% sure that the science is going to come out clean on that end, but for sure, it's not safe for kids to be doing it. I don't care. Period. I don't care if it's just flavoring. It's absolutely not safe. And what they show in kids who start vaping are 4 times more likely to then also start smoking cigarettes. So all these trends that we have been seeing in smoking going down are actually going to be reversed because they're doing both now. This is just something else from the Surgeon General's report. And then this is just, trying to show you how these things lead to more and more and more things, right? So if kids start doing all of these substances, the e-cigarettes, the drinking, marijuana early on as kids, it makes it so much easier to then start abusing pills out of someone's medicine cabinet. And then it leads to all these other things when they get to college, and possibly heroin, right? Which is the ultimate thing that we're really scared of. And this is why it's really important that you understand this now so you can stop anything from happening in this cycle. This I just want to show you because it's really important, because we talk about all these different substances, but really once someone starts messing with that pathway, it's not like they're not just, oh, I'm just smoking. Oh, I'm just doing pot. Oh, I'm just drinking, right? If they all go together, and these are just slides that show on the left, people who don't smoke cigarettes, how likely are they to use alcohol to binge alcohol, to drink heavily, to use marijuana or other illicit drugs, right? It's really low. Yes, alcohol is up. It's been around forever, so people are definitely going to be drinking alcohol. But if you smoke cigarettes, the likelihood of you doing all these other things is increased. And then these graphs just show the same thing. If you're using, this one is marijuana, right? Same thing. If you're drinking, you know, how likely are you to do all these other things? So they're all going to be happening, and it's really important if you notice one and do something about it, that you're really impacting use of a lot of other substances. How much time do I have now? Oh, 0 minutes. That time went by fast. Oh my God. So sorry for that. So anyway, I have lots of information about marijuana. Yes, it's addictive. No, it's not good for your kids' brains. There's lots of psychosis, vomiting. There's an ER term. It's called scromiting, screen vomiting, because it really affects their stomach because it's so high potent. So anything that you thought that you did when you were in high school, if anyone ever did that, that marijuana and whatever feeling you got is so not the same thing as what's going on these days. It is so, so potent. This is what your kids see, right? You cannot tell me this is marketed towards like, oh, adult use. Alcohol, good news though, the drinking has gone down. This is that same monitoring the future study. So what's really important for this as parents is like your kids will come home and be like, everyone's vaping. I went to this party, everyone's drinking. And it's really important that we don't fall into that, because the perception that everyone is doing it increases the risk for your kid to do it. So you need to kind of like set the record straight and let them know that not everyone is doing it. And you know, it would be nice if we had like local data to be like, okay, so this is what you say in the high school is going on. This is what I really know. Like, it would be really nice to be able to publicize that data. Like 70% of people are not drinking at parties, right? That would actually help other people who don't want to drink keep from drinking. So anyway, this is a final thing that's really important is I know I just gave you a bunch of information and it might be freaking you out. It still freaks me out with my 13-year-old, 15-year-old to think about, oh my God, like I don't want them to do this. I'm so scared, so scared. If they do start doing something, intervene early. But parents are really the biggest, the most important people in the kids' lives. And everything I do, you heard my little bio, is all about science. So anything I tell you, it's all based in science. It's not like conjecture or I think or whatever. There are studies that show that it is so important for parents to have conversations with their kids and to tell them how you feel about them not using substances, that they don't want to disappoint you. And even though they act like horrible teenagers sometimes, and you think that whatever you say doesn't matter, and you think that Amy, Gabrielle's best friend, is really the biggest person in her life, and that it's whatever Amy does, it's really not. It really is parents. So it's really important for you to be parents, to find ways that you can increase that dopamine release in healthy ways, like through sports, right? Helping them study so they get good grades, helping them socialize and create friendships. Again, that all causes dopamine release. Giving them praise in wherever you can find it, right? Like just find a way to find something good to say. And you have to be a parent. You cannot always trust their judgment. So it's okay to check their phones, right? To see what's going on. We were talking about that this morning. Check their messages, see what's going on. Model behavior, right? So a lot of times we're like, oh my God, I had the first day, I can't wait to have a glass of wine, right? We have to be careful with our words, that we're showing them that that's not, if we say, oh, we need that glass of wine, we're telling them the way we cope with stress is to take a drug. So like just be careful with the words that you say, and have lots of conversations. So anyway, I'm gonna stop for now. That was pretty much it. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much. I know people have questions, but if you could hold them until the end, we would appreciate it, because we have a few other panel speakers. and I'd like to make sure that they have a chance to address their issues as well. Our next speaker is Mike. That's you. It's Mike Robertson. Michael was sworn in as the Somerset County Assistant Prosecutor in 2016. He previously served as the Assistant U.S. Attorney in the District of New Jersey for 8 years, from 2008 until 2016. Prior to that, he served as Assistant Prosecutor at Essex County Prosecutor's Office from 2005 until 2008. Mr. Robertson attended Ridge High School. Graduate, and I was going to say, I'm guessing I was here when you were here, right? Graduated in 1995. Does it feel weird being back? He earned his Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from the Pennsylvania State University in 1999. He then earned his Juris Doctor from Hofstra University in 2002. He currently resides in Basking Ridge with his wife and 2 children. It's my pleasure to have Mike Robertson as a guest speaker today.
The thing is, Williams hasn't changed too much. Unlike Ridge is like 4 times the size it was when I was there. So my name is Mike Robertson. I'm the county prosecutor. I'd like to kind of start where Melissa left off, which was the slide of parents, that big word. A lot of these presentations I go to, and I appreciate everyone here, quite candidly, if I'm being honest, this whole auditorium should be full. But I understand people have jobs, they have lives, they have sports. It's tough, I get it. But this message that Melissa is sharing and that I'm sharing with the other panelists is really important. Because although most of my career spent in New York as a prosecutor, and I can tell you the perspective of working there every day is much different than Somerset County. But I will tell you this, when I came here and I was appointed as the county prosecutor, I was really shocked at the magnitude of the opioid and drug problem we have, not only in Basking Ridge, but the county, globally, if you will. And so that perspective has really forced me to make sure that in my capacity as the chief law enforcement officer, that I go out and talk to all of you and kids. I was at Ridge 2 weeks ago talking to junior and seniors about, what we're seeing in law enforcement. But what I wanted to say about the parent thing is, my father, he's retired military, he was a Secret Service agent, Hank Warner, so he's a former Bernard's police officer, he knows my father. He was kind of a tough guy, but he was a realist, he knew what I was doing and what I was facing as a high school kid. But he would always say this, and this is what I would say to all of you, and I say to everyone. He would say, Michael, I am your father, I am not your friend. And I keep reiterating that theme to people when I go to talk to them because, again, it's not just isolated here. It's everywhere in the state, everywhere in the county. It's this idea that parents think they need to be their kids' friends and they need to make sure that they're socially accepted by their peers and therefore they're going to do crazy things like host parties, which, I'm not going to get into a moral debate with anyone about, whether that's appropriate because it's illegal. You're not allowed to serve minors. You're not allowed to have a kegger in your basement and allow 16 and 17-year-olds to do that. And the whole moral argument, I'm preparing them from college. Trust me, they are out doing that stuff without you hosting the party. I know that because I did that when I was in high school. I don't need mom and dad to go get me beer at Gary's. We'll go find it on our own. So, that's just kind of one message that I'm trying to say is like parents need to be parents. I know it's hard. I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they drive me up a wall sometimes. I don't know how to figure it out. But I would really encourage people to have a dialogue, and a real dialogue, because the reality is, as Melissa pointed out, they are going to get exposed to things that are not good for them. Whether it's alcohol, whether it's marijuana, whether it's cigarettes, vapes, you name it. It's going to happen. So, we can't run from it or hide from it, but rather we need to have a real conversation with them about, not doing that. And again, this is, whether it's these things over here, the vape pens, whether it's the alcohol, it's just having a real conversation with them and keeping in tune with what's going on in their lives. Because even my fourth grade daughter, I mean, the stuff that they're doing academically, I think I was doing when I was here. And then separate from that, the academic stresses, if you will, I'll classify them as, it's the social stuff. And again, you see it, I have a second grade or fourth grade, you see it already with the social media, which I try to limit. Only 2 weekends they're allowed to have their phones. And people are like, how do you do that? I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, how do you keep the phone? I go, because I'm their parent. They get it on Friday night and it's done at Sunday, that's it. And even then I try to keep them off it to get out, and I see some lacrosse folks. I say, get out there and start practicing lacrosse. That's what we need to be doing. On the law enforcement front, look, I'll be specific to this town. This is, and I'm not saying this because I grew up here, I'm not saying this because some of them are here physically. This is probably one of the best, if not the best, police departments in Somerset County. If you ever look at a map, by the way, at Basking Ridge, we're kind of wedged between 287 and 78. And I will tell you, not scary, that those are major corridors for drug transportation, in and out of Newark, going west, as far west as California. Some of those tractor trailers are benign to you, but they're full of heroin, they're full of drugs, sometimes full of guns. And so on the law enforcement front, we're doing everything we can. Technology, just the way the kids use it, we use it to combat crime and catch bad guys doing bad things. But again, make no mistake, ever since that post 9/11 world we live in, where you say, the motto is see something, say something, I would encourage you all to do the same with us. If you see something, say something. Let us know. But, we're in the schools, we're out in the streets. I try to go wherever a community crisis wants me to go. I will go anywhere because I really feel that this message is important. And arguably, our most important asset are our children. And I obviously have a personal vested interest because I have 2 kids that live in this county that go to these schools. So I can tell you that this will be, it's definitely my top priority here in Somerset, which is educating people, letting them know, don't have your head in the sand. That's what I would tell you. Basking Ridge is a bubble. We hear that. A lot of these places around here are a bubble. It's not Newark where I work. Trust me. It is night and day. But you are not immune from this problem. Your kids are not immune from being exposed to this. And if anyone's in this audience thinking like, it's not my kid, I would tell you, don't think like that. Rather think, it could be my kid. It may happen tonight. So let me get out in front of this. Let me educate myself. Because again, I was once a high school kid. Times have changed, but a lot of things are still there. The alcohol, the drugs, the pressures. If anything, it's just gone tenfold with them, with what they're facing. So I'll sit down because I know, there may be questions and whatnot, but just know that we're doing everything we can on the law enforcement front, and that your kids are our number 1 priority.
Thank you. And we have another guest speaker. My pleasure to introduce Mrs. Marguerite Cahill. This is from Ridge High School. Marguerite has worked as a school counselor at Ridge High School since 2007 and was named Teacher of the Year in 2017. Congratulations. Ms. Cahill counsels 9th through 12th grade students dealing with a multitude of concerns, including social and emotional issues, educational concerns, and post-high school learning. She earned her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Bachelor of Science in Law and Justice from the College of New Jersey, her Master's in Clinical Psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology, is all but dissertated in clinical psychology, and received her law degree from California Western School of Law. She's licensed to practice law in New Jersey and California, and holds a school counseling certification in New Jersey. Prior to working at Ridge High School, she practiced criminal defense in Trenton, New Jersey, and worked as a counselor in the criminal justice system and in the counseling center at the University of California at Irvine. It's my pleasure to welcome her to William Annin this morning.
Thank you. So in addition to working at Ridge since 2007, I also have 2 girls who are in the school system here. My daughter Eva is a 7th grader here at WAMS, and I also have a daughter Stella who is at Cedar Hill. She's in 4th grade. So I know what it feels like to not only be an employee in a school district and be seeing things from the perspective of watching teenagers for the last 12 years, but also to be a parent and to be asking, probably some of the same questions that you were asking in terms of like, what are my kids up to? What do I need to know? What do I not know? And I think, unfortunately for us, the answer to that is we know nothing in comparison to what they know, because they have access to information that we did not have when we were their age. And we simply can't keep up with them. As many times as I ask, specifically my upperclassmen to fill me in about things that I need to know, they are like 10 steps ahead of where we are in terms of what they're using for technology. We had a conversation this morning about communicating with teenagers and how do we communicate with teenagers, and this idea of like, you send them an email. Like, yeah, right, they don't check their email. So we are not up to date with the way that they are communicating with one another, and that makes it difficult for us to communicate with them effectively because we are not on the same level as they are. Even a face-to-face conversation is not how they communicate. So the idea that a face-to-face communication is probably going to reach them, I don't know, to be honest with you. I'm not sure that it reaches them quite the same way as their communication with their friends. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about the school's approach and our philosophy and what resources we have available. I think that it's very important to note that both what Dr. Tassi and Mike Robertson just shared is that it's really important for parents to be on the front line. In school, we see things, but we see what your children want us to see and perhaps even what you want us to see when they are in school. So what's really important is for us to know what's really going on, because sometimes we don't get that information unless you choose to share it with us. So I just want to go over who your resources are. Who are the team of people who are here to support your students? So at WAMS, our principal, Karen Hudak, our 6th grade assistant principal, Sherry Howarth, in 7th grade, Dan Lederer, and in 8th grade, Adam Teresi. At the high school, our principal is Drew Krause. Our assistant principal, who's in charge of the current freshman class, is Scott Thompson, so he will be in charge of that class through the time that they graduate in 2022, which is why I put the class of, so that you understand that the assistant principal stays with them for the 4 years. So when Kathleen Ducebaut is done with these seniors, she will now be in charge of the upcoming freshmen. The class of 2021 is Dr. Gina Dunleavy. Class of 2020, Mr. Tom Thorpe, and the class of 2019, again, is Kathleen Ducebaut. Our school resource officers at WAMS, Officer Gina Lushivo, and at Bridge High School, Officer Chris Albanese. Our WAMS counseling staff, so our school counselors in 8th grade, Miss Lori Thompson and Mr. Andy West, who's unfortunately not in our picture. 7th grade, Miss Marissa Berkowitz, and Mr. Andy West also does one section of the 7th graders. 6th grade is Kara Rychecki and Jamie Sutton, and then we have 2 SACs here at WAMS. Mrs. Barbara Kurlansik, which I'm never going to get used to saying, so I'm always going to say Dr. Barbara Bush. And I should have said Dr. Barbara Kurlansik, I'm sorry, my slide is incorrect. And Miss Amy Stem. So those are our counseling staff here at WAMS. At Bridge High School, we have 8 counselors. So we have Miss Sweet, myself, Mrs. Trainer, Miss Wu, Miss Marview, Mrs. Capozzi, Miss Vanderstadt, and Mrs. Kukro. And then these are our student assistance counselors, Mrs. Anthony and Mr. Gelligan. Okay, so in terms of what resources we have available to you, so those are our players in addition to our case managers, our teachers, our school nurses. So we all really do play a role in terms of supporting your student, not only in terms of their mental health, but also in terms of any issues that they may be running into when it comes to substance abuse issues. Really what our goal is to not only educate students about the dangers of substance abuse, have them understand things like what Dr. Tassi talked about, even in terms of touching something that could actually be harmful to them. Also to assess the significance of the student's involvement with drugs and alcohol, and to provide support and referrals, and also to empower you as parents to assist and help manage student needs. So I know Dr. Tassi talked about it'd be interesting to compare local results. So results are always outdated, right? When you do a survey, it's immediately outdated. So these are the results of the 2016-17 drug and alcohol survey that was conducted here in Berners Township. So this was completed by 6th graders, 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders. And what they found in that survey was that alcohol and marijuana were the most widely used drugs, which is not particularly a surprise. That the rates of 10th and 12th graders admitting use of alcohol and marijuana had decreased from previous years. I do say admitting use, however, because I always do wonder whether there's a possibility that kids are getting more savvy about whether they want to admit that or not. However, there was a significant increase in 12th graders reporting use compared to 10th graders. So there was a very large increase from 10th to 12th grade about how many students were acknowledging use. Over 50% of 12th graders indicated that they had used alcohol in the past 30 days. 29% of 12th graders had reported use of marijuana during the past year, and 17% reported use in the past 30 days. Most students, they found, initiate alcohol and other drug use between the ages of 13 to 15, which is really important given the information that you heard from Dr. Tesfaye. Use of alcohol is most frequently reported at parties or with friends, and then the one that was the most concerning to me, not that that shouldn't be concerning, but that the third most common was at home with their parents' knowledge. So that is a major concern as a counselor in terms of saying to students, like, I really wish that you weren't doing this, but if I'm saying that and they're doing it at home and their parents know full well that they're doing it, that's sort of a mixed message as well. Most common issues reported by students who had gotten drunk in the past year were that they had experienced memory loss, passing out, and engaging in unwanted sexual behavior. The proportion of 12th graders, this I think is very significant as well, that the proportion of 12th graders reporting alcohol use in Berners Township was higher than the proportion nationally. So I do think that that's important. While it had dropped in the last couple of cycles of doing the drug and alcohol survey, it was still higher than the national average. So in Berners Township, we have several policies that have to do with voluntary drug testing. The first one is 5530, which is the student voluntary random drug testing, which I know that you're all familiar with, because if you have any students within grades 6 to 12, you have to fill out the selection form to determine whether or not your child is going to be voluntarily drug tested or not. The policy is not intended to be disciplinary or punitive, and students are not expelled or suspended solely based upon a positive test conducted under that program. So the idea is to find out which students need our help and to identify those students and begin to provide them with resources and services. There is also a policy that has to do with interscholastic athletes, and we have to have that because it has to do with NJSIAA's rules, and so that does have to do with whether or not they can engage in sports and activities if they test positive, that they are prevented from doing that for 1 year after the date of the test. We also have suspicion-based policies, which really come into play much more for myself and the other faculty members at WAMS and at Bridge, because we are actually required under the board policy 3280 that we have to immediately report any instance of substance abuse, violence, vandalism, accidents, or suspected child abuse. So if we see a student that we believe is under the influence, we are required to report that to administration. That is also, again, reiterated in policy 5530 that has to do with our substance abuse policy. So this 5530 has to do with the Board of Education prohibiting the use, possession, or distribution of any substance on school premises or at any event that is sponsored by the school that is away from school premises or on any transportation vehicle that's provided by the Board of Education. So this is the policy that would be cited if your student had used, possessed, or distributed a substance and had been identified as people who had done that. So there are of course penalties when it comes to discipline, because this is violating a student conduct policy, but the most important issue is that it identifies these students as being students who not only are utilizing substances, but these are students who are doing it at school or at a school function, which this is probably a little bit of conjecture on my part, but I don't think it's necessarily inappropriate conjecture. If you're using at school or under the influence at school or under the influence at a school-sponsored function, that indicates to me a higher concern and a higher risk, because you are unable to get through a day without utilizing a substance. You're not able to come to school without being under the influence, for example. So that is a big concern to me, because that is different to me than a student who is maybe recreationally using outside of school. That could be a big enough concern, but the idea that these are students who are unable to come to school or a school function without being under the influence is of specific concern to me as a counselor. Other important provisions that are within that policy, the 5530, is that the Board of Education has agreed to establish and maintain a comprehensive substance use intervention, prevention, and treatment referral program in the schools, that we establish consequences for people who does not follow through on the recommendations of an evaluation and other related behaviors, that they provide a program of instruction on the nature and effects of substances and tobacco,
that they provide services through staff members, including instruction, counseling, and related services to a pupil who is receiving medical or therapeutic care of diagnosed substance use. So, basically the idea is once your child is identified as a student who needs services, that we continue to provide them with counseling and other related services. We, combine with outside services to make sure that your student is well supported while they're at either Rams or Ridge High School. Information regarding a pupil's involvement in a school intervention or treatment program is kept strictly confidential. So a lot of parents have asked me, well, if my student is found to test positive, does that get reported to colleges? No, that does not get reported to colleges. No conduct actually gets reported to colleges on our part. We do not release disciplinary records. We cannot. There's a board policy that prohibits us from releasing disciplinary records to other secondary institutions, other than if you are going to another public institution within the state. But other than that, when you're talking about going to colleges or going to private schools, that information is not released. There is also a provision in 5530 where the superintendent or their designee will report pupils to law enforcement if they have reason to believe a pupil is unlawfully possessing or involved in distribution of controlled substances, steroids, or drug paraphernalia on or within 1,000 feet of the school property. That, of course, is a crime, so that gets reported to the appropriate law enforcement. This, however, does not apply to students who have voluntarily sought treatment or counseling for a substance abuse problem, provided that we find that they're not involved or implicated in a current drug distribution activity. Our smoking policy, so this is really important because this had to change quite significantly in the last 5 years because of the amount of vaping that was going on in schools, that our smoking policy to those types of devices. So this now does pertain to electronic smoking devices. The concern with an electronic smoking device is that not only do they violate potentially 5533, which is our student smoking policy, but there are implications for violating 5530 that has to do with the controlled substances because we don't know what's in that vape. So when students are caught with a vape on campus, what happens is that that vape is then confiscated and it has to be tested so that we know what's in it, because you simply cannot look at these things and know what's in them. And again, that idea, like it's just flavoring, that very well might be, or that very well might not be, and the only way to tell that is to have it tested. So a student who violates 5533 could, in fact, there could be implications for them to have actually violated the policy that relates to having a controlled substance on campus as well. We have a breathalyzer policy. So this was put into place several years ago when we wanted to start having the ability to test students coming into games, so athletic events, dances, proms, class trips, etc., where it would be easier to deter large numbers of students utilizing a substance before coming, for example, to a football game, by saying that every 5th student, for example, might be tested on their way into the game. I will tell you that I am a frequent flyer of football games, so I tend to go, and my husband and I noted that the first year that they started using what's called the PBASD, which is the passive breath alcohol sensor device, nearly no students were in the stands that year. It was unbelievable to me the number of students that had been there the previous year versus the first couple of games of that particular season. And that was concerning because, again, why are students not coming to the games? They're not coming to the games because they're concerned that they're going to be breathalyzed, and it means that they're not coming out to games without drinking first. So that was a concern. So if the screening for a passive breath alcohol sensor device does come up positive, they do run a second one in order to try to prevent false positives. And then if that subsequent screening also reveals a positive response, then the student is reported to the principal or their designee, the school nurse, or the school physician, and then further testing would have to happen. It's similar to what happens in 5530, which is the drug policy. So there is a procedure for faculty for suspicion-based testing. So when faculty have a suspicion that a student might be under the influence, again, we're required to report that. We report that generally to the grade level administrator or the principal. And there is no fault for faculty if you're incorrect, because the idea is you're trying to protect students. This is not that you are, attempting to get a student in trouble. I can tell you that none of us walk around hoping to find a student who looks like they are under the influence. When I chaperone at the prom, it's like my worst nightmare that especially that it might be one of my students could potentially come to the prom under the influence. I generally give them a pretty big speech beforehand, like, please don't put me in that position, because I have no interest in being the one who sends you out and ruins your prom. The administrator then takes the student to the nurse to be screened so that we're sure that they are actually medically cleared to leave the building. We don't want a student who potentially is under the influence and could in fact be, overdosing, or there could be a problem, to send them in their parents' care for testing if they really don't belong going anyplace other than a hospital. So they are medically cleared by the nurse in order to leave the building. The administrator calls the parent or the guardian. The student is searched and the belongings are searched, and then consequences can ensue from that particular search that might be in addition to whether or not they test positive. The parent or guardian meets with the administrator. They receive a packet of information that shows them what the testing procedures are, which includes a physical exam and a urine test. So they can take their student to Concentra, which is at the board's expense, that they would go ahead and have that student tested there. And then the other option is to take them to your own personal physician, and that's at the parent's expense or the guardian's expense. The paperwork indicates what suspicious behaviors were noted by the staff member. So was it like pupils were dilated? Was it some other type of behavior? The testing must occur immediately within 4 hours, and failure to comply is considered a violation of policy 5530 if the testing does not happen within the 4-hour window. Once the testing occurs and the paperwork is signed by a physician, the student may then return to school unless consequences stemmed from the search that I mentioned before. Results are typically available in 3 to 7 days, and they have to be shared with the school nurse and the principal. Otherwise, the results are confidential. If the result is positive, they are subject to disciplinary action, and they also meet with the student assistance counselor, either at WAMS or at Ridge, to initiate a referral potentially for a drug and alcohol evaluation conducted by a licensed professional, if that's deemed to be necessary, depending upon the levels in the blood, or the urine rather, that may indicate whether or not we decide to determine that they are, needing an evaluation. The reentry meetings are held upon the conclusion of a suspension following a positive result or possession, and they include the SAC, the assistant principal, the counselor, and the case manager if appropriate, as well as the school nurse. So the reason that we have the reentry meeting, they're designed to support the student and the family and to remind them of the team approach, to empower parents to support their students and his or her needs. And then we make suggestions to parents and guardians that include things like parental strategies to consider given what problems we may have uncovered from speaking to the student and from seeing what the results were of the testing. Referrals for individual treatment, potentially for the student and perhaps the parent or guardian as well. Consultation with a pediatrician, sharing information with a current therapist or a psychiatrist if the student has one. Potentially an evaluation at either High Focus or another provider. For example, some of our students go to Gen Psych or Summit Behavioral. Many of these programs, however, do begin at age 13, which is significant for the counselors who work here at WAMS because they don't always apply to students who are younger than that age. And sometimes, therefore, there are also concerns about placing younger children in groups with older children at some of these facilities. So therefore, individual therapy may be more preferable for younger students, and that would be something that Dr. Herlanson would talk to you about if you were having a reentry meeting here at WAMS. Program options for students who are found to have a problem with substance abuse could be an IOP program, which is intensive outpatient, partial day programs, or inpatient programs, depending upon the level of care that's needed. That evaluation is done at the particular site for that program rather than being done at the school. There are self-help groups, for example, like AA and NA. There's also Al-Anon and Alateen, and then there's a New Jersey self-help clearinghouse. There's also the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, where parents can obtain resources that include information and also kind of some coaching and some understanding about how they can deal with their child who may have a substance abuse problem. So just a couple of considerations for parents. It's really important that you partner with trusted people at the school, whether that is the school counselor, the SAC, a case manager if your student has special education services, the administration, to assist you with providing support to your child. Our policies are not designed to punish students with substance abuse issues, but rather to educate students about the potential dangers, to identify students who struggle as early as possible, and to provide them with resources, support, and referrals for outside treatment. If you have questions or you're worried about your child, or really even someone else's child, please feel free to reach out to us. It's critically important that we reduce the stigma for your child. If you are not willing to ask for help, they are not going to be willing to ask for help. I can't tell you how many times I have heard from a student, my parents told me that you write my letter of recommendation, so I shouldn't tell you anything that isn't positive. That's really concerning because we really need to know what information we need to know in order to help your child. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up and we are going to have a question and answer session.
Thank you very much. I would ask our speakers. I'm going to ask our speakers if they would take seats here, and then we could just pass the microphone back and forth. And if you have a question, you do need to come up to the front and ask it in one of the microphones. We also have our two school resource officers, Gina Lospiavo and Chris Albanese, who are here. Just so that you know, Gina has been with the Bernards Township Police Department for 24 years, and she does a number of things at William Ann, including teaching many health classes, which she could talk about. And Chris has been he's a detective with the Bernards Township Police Department for 10.5 years, now at Ridge High School. I think I've left 2 seats for you guys here. Come on. So, questions? Please come up. There you go.
This is a great presentation, thank you. I don't have a question, I have a comment. 2 weeks ago, I have a 9th grader and an 11th grader. There was a presentation at school, and my son came home and was telling me how great it was. It had such an impact on him. So I just wish as a district, instead of doing all these health classes, they would do more presentations of people who've had problems coming in, because I think that makes a big difference.
Was that the one where the 2 former Ridge students?
Yes.
Yeah, that was myself and one of my good friends.
Yeah, that had a great impact for my son.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? You answered every question. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Try to get the ball rolling. First, I just want to say, seriously, I don't think that you understand how lucky you are. I do these programs for schools all over the place. I don't do them at some schools because they're so scared to even have the conversation. But you guys have, so first of all, I mentioned community in crisis, like this community hub that will help you figure out whatever it is you need to figure out, whatever it is. They can connect you with the resources. You have a prosecutor who understands the disease and he said, is like one of his top priorities is to protect this community. Substance use is related to a lot of crimes, right? It's the cars that get broken into, houses that get broken into, like a lot of that is related to someone's substance use disorder because they need the money to buy the drugs. So like it's really important to him from a law enforcement perspective and a personal perspective. And then Marguerite Cahill, I can't tell you how impressed I am. I'm like blown away, like her resume, whatever, first of all. And then second of all, like seriously, the way that the policies that are in place, I know she kept saying not punitive, like that is really important. Again, it's that dopamine reward system, right? To know that students can find a place that they can go to seek help, that they're not going to get in trouble is, I mean, obviously if they're doing certain things, you're going to get, you have to have consequences, but for the school to understand that this is a disease and that early intervention is so much more important. I find so many schools that are like, okay, like it's like they're just gripping the table, just hoping nothing happens, and that once they graduate, they're like, okay, that's enough, right? Like, you guys are being proactive. I'm just blown away. So impressed. And the other thing I want to say about these parents that host parties, again, everything I do is evidence-based, and I don't just say stuff because I say it. There's plenty of data that shows that the parents who facilitate alcohol use are those children are at higher risk for developing these addictions and being heavy alcohol users when they go away to college. Like whatever we feel that we think we're doing, like, because I know parenting, a lot of things are like gut, like we don't really have the data and we're just like, winging it, and we're like, well, if we do this, and I know maybe it's the best intentions, but science shows that it's not. So anyway, that's all I have to say, but I really would love questions. Like, do you have any questions about anything? And not for me, necessarily. No.
Hi, I have a question and a comment. My question is, what processes or ways are there in place? My biggest fear is that my kids would use substances and I'm going to be the last person to know. So how can I know about it early enough to do something? How can parents help our teachers? Like, I don't know, even somebody said about our friends' kids, if we suspected we know anything, how can we communicate? And how can we overcome the fear of being a snitch? And everybody, it takes a village. So all the kids, how can they, what are the ways of processing the channels for everybody to take care of each other and communicate and to be able to act on time? That's my question. And just a quick comment regarding the dopamine input. You mentioned that I don't understand if they're either they need more dopamine or their metabolism more quickly or something. But I kind of understood that children who had traumas are more at risk. But it sounded like if there was a divorce or an abuse at home, those are the kids at risk. And I imagine that all kids with happy families and mental healthy families and all that are eventually at risk, not only kids with traumas.
Right, so first of all, thank you for pointing that out, because I absolutely don't want that to come across. So any child is at risk, right? And we don't necessarily know what trauma your child has had and what they've had to deal with as kids, even though we try to be as good parents as possible. But yeah, absolutely anyone is at risk. My point with that information was just that as parents, if we know these things are happening, right? If we know that our child is suffering from depression or anxiety, or we've had a divorce. My family, we had a really bad family situation, like inside the house. Like if you know that as a parent, that should put you on a little bit higher guard of really paying attention. It's no one should pretend that this can't happen to their child, because you just don't know. And that dopamine, right? The dopamine is what causes the pleasure. So when a kid takes a drug and the dopamine is released and that's what makes them feel good, right? The more that they do that, the more they associate with whatever that activity was, whether it's drugs or whatever, that makes them feel good, the more they're going to do it. So if they are just kind of like isolated socially, but then they start vaping and they see that they're hanging around more people, that association with being around more people makes them more vulnerable. So, not just because you have anxiety or these traumas are you the only people that are going to develop. That just makes you more at risk for you to pay attention to.
In terms of addressing the questions that you have about, what can parents do and what should you be looking for, and how do you make sure you're not the last person to know? I think that several of those things were pointed out today, but I really want to drive those home. Like the idea, Mike had said, you're not your child's friend. I think that idea of, putting in parameters that allow you to know what your child has been doing, because they have to face you on the way in the door. Don't go to bed before they get home, and have someone who can stay awake long enough, because in my house it's not me. Oh, that's good. Sleep in their beds.
I learned that one recently.
Okay.
Sleep in their beds.
To sleep in your child's bed, so that when they get home, you're like, hi, it's me. Half the time I fall asleep there anyway, because I'm trying to get somebody to go to sleep. But so I should be really familiar with it by the time I get to that point. But I think also the idea of having enough communication with your child. I know that Dr. Tassi mentioned the idea that there are communities where parents or school districts are afraid to even say the words drugs and alcohol, as if it's going to make your child use them because you have said those words. There's a meme out there right now that says, you don't make your child a llama by talking about llamas. It's the same idea. It's like, you're not going to make your child an alcoholic by mentioning the word alcohol in your house. So I think asking the right questions, having rules in place that allow you to know where your child is and what they're doing, and asking those types of questions are really important. I think encouraging your child, if your child says to you, I'm really worried about this particular friend, don't engage in the, well, yeah, I don't know if we really want to tell anyone because I don't want so-and-so's parent to be upset, or I don't forget engaging in those types of conversations, because the bottom line is, if we're worried about somebody's safety, I don't really care if their parent is upset that the child got reported, or if the child is even upset that they got reported. Like, let us deal with that in terms of supporting that student who is upset about being outed, or the child who has to do that, supporting them in terms of telling them what an amazing thing they have done for that other student. But I think that engaging in even that back and forth about being worried about, giving information, like as if this is some kind of like major secret, like this is important information for the people who care about them to know. And I think sometimes the best way to do that is really encouraging your child to reach out to trusted adults at school. Obviously if your child is linked up with their own counselor, or just to go in and say, I'm worried about another student. Once you start to reflect that to your child, that that's what we do, then that will happen. A few years ago, we had a major loss in the high school of a student, and we talked a lot about like saying something when you're worried about someone. And her friends were really instrumental in having basically a campaign to talk about the importance of saying something when you're worried about somebody. And I think that same thing goes for whether it's mental health, whether it's substance abuse. It doesn't particularly matter what the concerns are. They could be eating disorder concerns. I mean, there's all sorts of concerns that students could have at this particular age, but I think that idea of normalizing that you do talk about them, and you do go in and talk to trusted people about the fact that you're worried. I think the more you can do that, the more you might experience the same thing from your own child, that they're going to talk to you, or if not you, somebody else, and then you will be able to step in at the time when it's necessary.
Two things we'll follow. So, Caitlin, you probably may know this too. There is a program that's put out where they do like a simulated bedroom, and hidden in plain sight, thank you. And basically they do a presentation, and I put it out on my social media page when they host it, but I think the last time they did RVCC, they did one.
It's coming.
It's coming, okay, so I'll let Tony.
October 27th.
But okay, so it's a simulated bedroom, and they just show you things to look for in your kid's room that could be concealing a vape pen or marijuana or whatever, So there's resources available out there to kind of, help you figure out, like I said earlier, it's hard to figure out how to parent sometimes. The other comment that I just wanted to make was, I've, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I've probably met over 100 people, if not more, that suffer from the disease of addiction. And I will tell you that a large portion of them are not people from, like where I work in Newark. They are straight A students. They are captains of football teams, lacrosse teams, headed to Division I colleges, whatever. So the idea that kids are more susceptible to this abuse, or this falling victim to this addiction, is only if they suffer some sort of traumatic thing is totally false. And I think that's why, like as a community, I would really encourage people to rid the idea of the stigma of addiction. There's a lot of people, it takes a lot of courage for someone to get up and be open and honest. The one woman who commented about my friend, Andrew Missioner, he's open about it, his alcoholism, and the other young woman who went to Ridge. And the idea was, we wanted the kids to be like, we were you. Yeah, we're 40 now, but we were you. We walked these hallways, we did what you did. And I think it resonated with them that it's okay if you have a problem, and it's okay to go to someone. I know for me as a parent, if God forbid one of my kids was suffering from something, I would want that parent to tell me, or their kid to come to me. And I think a lot of us are hesitant to, like, quote, stick our nose in other families' business. But I gotta tell you, like, I think at the end of the day, any mom or dad, if you approached me and said, hey Mike, I want you to know, like, Bobby says William's like doing something that's not consistent with what I would want to know that. So I hope that anyone in this audience would have the courage, just mom to mom, dad to dad, whatever, parent to parent, say, hey, heads up, like, I don't know if it's anything, but I would want to know.
How many of you would want to know if someone came to you? Great. So no one didn't raise a I don't think anyone did not raise their hand.
Yeah.
So it's to follow on from this communication thing and how important that is, which I completely agree with. But at the schools, there is this very horrible consequence of being found with any of these pods or anything in the bag or wherever at school. And that, with the suspension thing, that reduces kids wanting to come forward and say, I know this, this, and this. Is there any way we could do some sort of limited program time where we're trying to promote kids and get them to communicate by not having that in place, I don't know, for 48-hour period or...
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also a misconception. If someone comes in and says, I have a problem, or a student comes in and says, my friend has a problem, we don't search that student or, you know, give them a breathalyzer or send them out for testing. The only reason that we do that is if we suspect that they're under the influence in the school building. So there is no punishment for a student who comes forward and says, my friend has a problem, or I have a problem. So I think that that's really important to notice, that there's no suspension whatsoever associated with that. Suspension comes into play when a student has violated the code of conduct, which is to come to school either possessing something or under the influence. You know,
the chances are, if the child is doing it, and then you're going to look into it, then they may well have something in their bag, and then they're suspended. And so just hearing the word on the street, I'm trying to...
Yeah, but when we look into it, we're not searching their bag. Like, just to be clear...
But they do. The schools do. Because as soon as they've got, what's it, reasonable doubt?
Reasonable suspicion.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to help it
Let's bring it back from the law.
That's my only point. I just want it to move forward. And
right.
I'm trying to think out the box and you know.
I just want to, I don't need to take it away because this is all about counseling. Again, this is all data. So I hear you and I see, right, like you want to be helpful, but then you don't necessarily want to be punitive, whatever. But it's important to balance both of those because the consequences in and of themselves have been shown to reduce the substance use. So you kind of have to balance consequences, appropriate consequences, with appropriate things, as well as I think that it's kind of like parenting. Like you have to have consequences. Like you can't just be, oh, I love you, I don't care what you do, it's okay, right? You have to have consequences, or else they never learn. It's about that brain development. But the school is lucky that you have that even you have people that actually understand and care. It's the compassionate part is what will really break through, I think, with the kids. Because, anyway, you have to balance both.
Yeah, I just also wanted to mention that in terms of the punishment, even if a student was suspended for 2 days or 3 days or 4 days, that's 2 or 3 or 4 days of their entire life. And if we're talking about a cycle that's going to start somewhere between the ages of 13 and 18 potentially and last them potentially the rest of their lives, because that could be how they end their life, I feel like that is a small price to pay for identifying that student as a student who needs services and then providing them with those services. So again, we don't release disciplinary information to any other organization, no colleges, it doesn't go anywhere other than being part of their, I love when students are like, it's part of my record, like as if this is like some thing that's like, they carry around with them. Like it's a file in my office that I think I've looked at twice. So, it's not something that is, that impactful. It might feel like it at the time for them, but I hope it does feel somewhat impactful in the sense of being like, wow, like I gotta get it together. But it is also not meant to be something that they carry with them as like a scarlet letter for the rest of the time. And again, it's not, the fact that they're suspended, yes, I guess people will notice they're not in school, but no one is told that they're being suspended for a particular reason. So that is not something that their teachers are aware of or that really anybody else who works with them is aware of.
And you're not suspending them, like, you're not just like, okay, you're suspended. Like, there's counseling, there's discussions that are involved, so it's not just like, here you go to jail.
I just want to add my 2 cents to that because I worked at the high school for 12 years and William Annin at the time and then William Annin forever. But in my humble experience, it's very, very rare. Like maybe 1 out of every 100 kids or maybe less. It's very rare that students recognize that they have a problem. Most likely they minimize their use and they deny that it's a problem because they're not at that point of recognizing that they're not in control. So I don't know if your experience is different. It takes something really scary for them to think like, oh my gosh, something really scary has to happen in their life for them to say maybe this is a problem.
Everyone who develops an addiction doesn't realize they have the addiction until they can't stop. And so,
I was just trying to
And
think
then
ways to improve the communication. I wasn't
Right.
doubting
Well,
it.
and it really, it's a fine line. You know, it's a fine line. If we have kids coming down worried about their friends, it's treated in much more of a counseling, supportive, what's happening way. You know, people are worried about you, what's going on, much more than we're going to act on that right away in discipline. I think counseling is much more confidential and much more supportive. And at least at William Annin, I could say parents will always know. If somebody comes down worried about your child, you will know that. I personally call people, especially at this age. I would like to wrap it up if we have no other questions. I would highly recommend two things: that you check out the websites of Communities in Crisis and the Municipal Alliance. They are a wealth of information. Every time I see more information posted, I'm impressed. If you have any questions at all, those two websites will answer anything. I would encourage you to follow up if you have more questions at the Hub tomorrow with the Communities in Crisis. And just recommend two things. There's two big things in the prevention literature that make a difference. One is to increase the perception of risk, okay, and that could be risk to health. That could be risk to what's going to happen if I find out, in terms of, family rules and things. That could be the perception of ruining a reputation, ruining their future, getting in trouble with the law, whatever the risk is. Increase the perception of risk. And that's one thing I'm worried about if marijuana legalization is passed, because that just decreases the perception of risk. So increasing that and decreasing access. So don't keep alcohol around. If you see things, find them, look for stuff. And my favorite with my daughters when they were growing up was trust but verify. Ronald Reagan and the Cold War. Trust but verify. You trust them, but you verify where they are, what they're doing, who they're with, et cetera, et cetera. But you want to increase the perception of risk and decrease access. I would like to thank everybody for coming today, and thank all